You have mentioned about the attachment. What exactly the attachment is in the spirituality? Because there are the concepts running like, you have to understand the detachment, and you don't have to be attached with everyone to be a spiritual person. So how do one understand what is attachment, and if there is a detachment, then what is a detachment?
Okay. Now, the thought created I, which is generally called the ego, but the word ego is sort of derogatory. So let's use the term outer self. The I created by thought, the outer self, is afraid of being pushed aside. So it wants to cling to some people, attachment to people, or cling to some philosophy or religion. It gives the outer self a feeling of being somebody. And that's why people want to become famous, because then they think they are somebody and they cannot be destroyed. The outer self feels good in that case. That is attachment to the image that one has about oneself, the image that society has created in them. And that image, attachment to that image, is what causes the ego. And so we find that this attachment leads to problems because the outer self doesn't like being pushed down. And even in simple arguments, it wants to win because there is indirectly the fear of death. If I am pushed aside, I will die kind of fear. The outer self has that fear, and that's why it wants to prevail over others in arguments, and finally it ends up in war and so on. So the attachment is essentially a characteristic of the outer self. The thought created habitual neurology produces this image about oneself, and that outer self is always in the lookout for some attachment to people, attachment to conclusions, philosophies, property, and so on. So without that, the outer self will feel insecure. That is why most people end up with attachment to some of these things. And so that creates problems for oneself and others. And the detachment comes through self awareness. Attachment cannot be pushed aside through effort because all effort comes from the outer self. So, J. Krishnamurti's primary point is no effort can dissolve the ego or the outer self, only quiet self awareness. Like if somebody is angry and the self awareness at the time of being angry does something to that anger. And similarly, watching oneself functioning in attachment, it is that self awareness that can dissolve the attachment, not the effort to get rid of it.